Hi, my name is John Vest, and I'm the visiting assistant professor of evangelism at Union Presbyterian Seminary. Union and other Presbyterian seminaries were established over 200 years ago, in part because there were a lot of Presbyterian churches without trained, educated clergy. Well, this is no longer the situation. Instead, because of church membership declines, it's more often the case that existing churches can no longer afford a full-time installed pastor. They must either reduce to a part-time pastor or close the church altogether. This means that there is no guarantee that a recent seminary graduate will get an existing church job. In fact, there are always more call seekers in the system than available positions, especially for first-time calls. And even though some people point out that impending retirements will soon open up more pulpits than we have candidates in the pipeline, I suspect that many of those churches will no longer be viable or able to afford a full-time pastor after their current pastor retires. So what's the solution to this problem? One, we can grow these churches so that they can once again afford a full-time pastor. Two, there are, of course, non-parish ministry opportunities for seminary graduates. Three, we need to get back into the business of aggressively starting new churches, which is demonstrably more successful than revitalizing struggling congregations. Or four, those called to church ministry in our post-Christendom culture need to think seriously about bivocational ministry. While each of these areas is worth exploring in greater detail, for this video I want to focus on the fourth, bivocational ministry. Now, the notion of bivocational ministry goes all the way back to the early church, in particular to Paul. His missionary work was significantly funded by his secular work making tents. Hence, this kind of ministry is often called tent making. The idea is simple. Pastors and educators are paid only part-time or not at all by their congregation or ministry and support themselves by holding an outside job or maybe multiple outside jobs. The pros of this approach are, one, new or existing ministries are not as reliant on charitable giving, which is challenging in many of our ministry contexts. Buildings and staff are always the most expensive costs for an existing congregation, so reducing one of those will greatly help. Two, in terms of missional and evangelistic outreach, the bivocational pastor or educator is out in the community more, making connections and expanding their network through their second job. Those second jobs therefore become opportunities for ministry. Now, cons, it's hard. It's difficult being stretched in multiple directions. Of course, the existing model is equally hard. If it weren't, this wouldn't be an issue. Second, not as much time to devote to ministry. Of course, there is a good argument to be made that ministry has become too professionalized and the pastors do a lot of the work that the congregation could probably do themselves. Three, people value what they pay for and vice versa. If a church or a ministry doesn't pay a pastor's salary, they may become less invested in that ministry. Of course, it may be that we are returning to a less institutionalized form of Christianity in post-Christendom, something much more akin to the models of the early church. So how do you do something like this? One, consider pursuing ministry as a second career. To make a living wage, you need to have skills. A minimum wage job will only get you so far. So establishing a career and a set of skills first will leave your options open when you begin ministry later. Second, find ways to leverage the skills and passions you already have into viable forms of tent making. This is actually what I'm in the process of doing right now. My appointment at Union will conclude in a year, and between now and then, my wife and I have purchased this food truck behind me, and we're trying to build it into a mobile barbecue food business, which is a passion of mine. It just so happens that it happens to work well with the new worshiping community we're also trying to build, which is a dinner church model. model. My hope is that those two will work together. Now, as you think about bivocational ministry, keep these things in mind. One, ministry is a calling, not a job. I tell students all the time, I hope you didn't come to seminary because you're banking on a nice middle-class job on the other side. Ministry may no longer be a nice middle-class profession. In fact, this phenomenon is relatively recent in church history. Instead, I hope students come to seminary because the Spirit stirs something inside of them and they want to make a positive difference in the world. We can do that regardless of where our paycheck comes from. Second, either before or concurrent with seminary, learn another marketable skill. And three, at some point, learn about entrepreneurship. Whether it's in existing churches or new ministries, these days all pastors and educators need to be able to create new things. Entrepreneurial ministry is a necessity in today's world.